The following is distributed by the Berean Call.
Chapter 7. Truth or Lie. As we've already seen, the New Age employs euphemisms in order to disguise the religion behind it. Words like witchcraft, spiritism, animism, and voodoo still have quote-unquote bad vibes and connotations of ignorance and superstition. Traditional sounds so much better. It has an aura of broad-minded acceptance of native cultures without judging them. And getting back to one's roots is currently in vogue. For those who are still struggling to shake off Judeo-Christian morality learned in childhood, the euphemism traditional covers a multitude of sins. As a means of easing the burden on modern healthcare systems, the World Health Organization, WHO, of the United Nations has given official approval to, quote, traditional healers, unquote, around the world. In Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, for example, Dr. Bingara Suma, quote, a consultant traditional healer who shares a medical center with two conventional Western-trained doctors, straightens his animal skin headdress, removes his shoes, inhales snuff through both nostrils, and wills himself into a hypnotic trance, unquote. He then calls upon his spirit guide to advise him, quote, people who come here have a choice between the Nanga, traditional healer, or the doctors, unquote, says Barbara Sibanda, a registered nurse who owns the Zimbabwe Medical and Traditional Practitioners Center. Quote, but the Nanga is the busiest of our consultants. Even whites choose to go to him, unquote. There are about 8,000 licensed traditional healers in Zimbabwe alone who, quote, pass on their secrets and their spirits from father to son or mother to daughter and claim to be able to cure most illnesses, unquote. To New Agers, quote-unquote spirits is a native word for the mind powers that lie within us all. Euphemistic Exorcism. It is not merely the word traditional that exorcises witchcraft and spiritism of its old demonic connotations. Witchcraft and shamanistic powers, which have always been instinctively recognized as demonic, are today called psychic and are accepted even by science. Under the new labels, leading scientists who formerly rejected witchcraft and spiritism as pagan superstition are now discovering real power in quote-unquote traditional techniques. Zimbabwe's Deputy Health Minister, Dr. Simon Mazarodes, has said, quote, these traditional healers have a lot to teach us, especially in the field of mental health, unquote. A recent, quote, experiment at the All India Institute of Mental Health in Bangalore found that Western-trained psychiatrists and native, that is traditional, faith healers had a comparable recovery rate. The most notable difference was that the so-called witch doctors released their patients sooner, unquote. This should not have been surprising. Long before this test was conducted, world-renowned research psychiatrist E. Fuller Torrey, in his book Mind Games, declared, quote, the methods of Western psychiatrists, with few exceptions, are on the same scientific plane as the methods of witch doctors, unquote. If all is one, as New Age consciousness tells us, then evil is good, God and Satan are one, and everything there is can be found within the self. Therefore, as Danish physician Dr. Halfdan Mahler, Director General of WHO, declared, quote, nothing should be sacrosanct simply because we have been led to believe that it is witchcraft, unquote. Quote-unquote alternative is another popular New Age euphemism. Alternative medicine is considered to be the new wave in healthcare. In reality, it is mainly a return to the old methods of pagan occultism, involving a, quote, realignment of psychic forces, unquote, within the body through such occult techniques as acupuncture, reflexology, and yoga, along with diagnostic practices out of the occult, such as vitamin kinesiology, radiesthesia, and pendulum diagnosis. Like a placebo, these things work only if one believes they will. Thus, they are related to the mysterious mind powers of the New Age. We will analyze mind powers in a broader context later. Then there are quote-unquote alternate lifestyles. another euphemism for homosexuality or lesbianism or free sex, which is supposed to remove any connotation of sin or immorality. The word lifestyle itself is a euphemism that frees New Agers of any moral restraint. Whatever way of life one chooses to adopt is simply a style that can be changed, like hair or dress styles, without any moral implications, or so one is led to believe. The Abolition of Man. New Age educators use the term values clarification as a euphemism in our public schools to hide their deliberate rebellion against moral absolutes. Quote-unquote clarification of values is generally calculated to do away with Judeo-Christian morals by denying there is any absolute standard available for measuring moral values. Obviously, if there is no objective measurement, then the very word values becomes meaningless. Certainly it has no morality attached to it. In rejection of the Judeo-Christian moral absolutes taught in the Bible that derive from the personal Creator God, quote, values clarification, unquote, encourages the student to look within himself for inner guidance. The only thing that matters is how the student feels about a situation. Above all, he must be true to himself and not succumb to the pressure of the opinions of others, the taboos of society, or religious standards. What is actually happening, however, is that the unsuspecting student is being conditioned to accept New Age values. And in most cases, the parents are just as unsuspecting of what is really happening to their children in the process of public school education. In his fascinating book, The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis referred to an elementary school textbook of his day which was supposed to teach English to school children. However, it was in reality a calculated attempt to undermine a belief in any moral values outside the individual's own preferences and feelings. It was also designed to condition the unsuspecting students to accept the quote-unquote values presented in the textbook. What C.S. Lewis had to say about that particular children's textbook in his day is of even greater importance with regard to hundreds of similar but more dangerous New Age textbooks in the 1980s. Quote, the very power of the authors depends on the fact that they are dealing with a boy who thinks he is doing his English prep and has no notion that ethics, theology, and politics are all at stake. It is not a theory they put into his mind, but an assumption, which 10 years hence, its origin forgotten and its presence unconscious, will condition him. The authors themselves, I suspect, hardly know what they are doing to the boy, and he cannot know what is being done to him." Unquote. Much like the book that C.S. Lewis describes above, but far more persuasive and dangerous, Dr. Beverly Gallien's Language from Within is supposed to be a confluent education handbook for teaching English in today's public schools. In reality, it has far less to do with English than with philosophy and religion. Says Dr. Gallien, quote, "Confluent education has as its goal to educate teachers in Gestalt awareness theory and practice, and to research the results of teachers using these Gestalt strategies in classes." Unquote. One wonders how many parents would object if they knew that their children were guinea pigs in a government-funded psychotherapeutic experiment to test Gestalt theory. Gallien also says, quote, "Confluent education is the deliberate attempt to merge thinking and feeling into one integrated process." Unquote. Without realizing what is being done to them, the students are conditioned to look to their feelings for guidance. This is a very dangerous conditioning process. Dr. Gallien's own peculiar religious beliefs are being taught in public schools, where religion is not to be introduced. Dr. Gallien's book instructs teachers in how to carefully condition their students to accept and experience Gallien's own religious beliefs. If Christianity were being taught in public schools under a similar guise, it would be promptly thrown out. Certainly the ACLU would be up in arms. However, Gallien's confluent education and other similar New Age education techniques are accepted in public schools and backed by government funds, even though they condition the students to accept the basic religious beliefs of Hinduism. Very few parents or students recognize what is happening. This conditioning process that is going on in our public schools across America was described by C.S. Lewis. Quote, The process which, if not checked, will abolish man, goes on apace among communists and Democrats no less than among fascists. The methods may, at first, differ in brutality, but many a mild-eyed scientist in pince-nez, many a popular dramatist, many an amateur philosopher in our midst, means in the long run just the same as the Nazi rulers of Germany." Unquote. Traditional values are to be debunked and mankind to be cut into some fresh shape at the will, which must, by hypothesis, be an arbitrary will, of some few lucky people in one lucky generation which has learned how to do it. The belief that we can invent ideologies at pleasure begins to affect our language." Unquote. Guided imagery. The language that Dr. Beverly Gallien's confluent education conditions the students to accept from within is euphemistic and New Age to the core. Children are led into contact with spirit guides, but Dr. Gallien cautions teachers that it is best to call them imaginary guides or wise persons in public schools. Typical of the method that Gallien and other New Agers teach, and which is being widely used in public schools today, beginning in kindergarten, is the following suggestion to be intoned by the teacher. Quote, "Close your eyes and relax. I will lead you in a guided fantasy. Imagine a very beautiful valley. Ahead of you is a mountain. You have magic powers, so climbing is easy. At the top, look into the sun, and as you do, the face of a very wise person slowly appears. You ask, 'What must I do to find happiness in my life right now?' The person answers, 'Listen to this person speaking.' You may engage in a conversation. When you feel finished with your conversation, come back to us here in the room. Write an account of what was spoken between you and the wise person." Unquote. Similar methods are being used by medical doctors, such as Dr. Irving Oil of the University of California at Santa Cruz, and the quote-unquote psychic guides that appear in the imagination literally cure impossible medical problems that have defied all other treatment. Fundamentalist Christians believe that these guides are spirit beings of great evil and deception, similar to the demons that impersonate spirits of the dead in seances. Although psychologists generally reject this belief, they have no better explanation for the psychic phenomena that often develop spontaneously and the evil that can suddenly arise out of what seemed at first to be so good. Elmer and Alice Green, who have been involved in biofeedback research at the Menninger Foundation in Kansas since 1964, warn against the danger involved in developing contact with quote-unquote imaginary guides. New Age public school teachers are either unaware of or ignore the warnings. Here is one of the many cases the Greens cite. Quote, "A woman wrote that after her husband had taken the mind training course, one of his imaginary psychic advisors unexpectedly began speaking to him without being asked. The advisor explained that he was God, and for spiritual reasons the wife also must take the course. When she refused to do this, God told him to get a divorce. She and her teenage sons were unable to influence her husband. He also developed some other peculiarities." Unquote. Abuse of the imagination plays a large part in confluent education because Gallien and other New Age educators are convinced that the students can create their own reality with their minds. Although Gallien sincerely believes that we are each God and therefore have within us all knowledge and wisdom, she adopts the euphemisms intuition or universal consciousness to hide any religious connotations. Her presentation of Hinduism is usually not recognized as religion because guided imagery seems so, quote-unquote, natural. And what could be more natural than getting in touch with yourself? As that master occultist Rudolf Steiner, founder of anthroposophy, said years ago, quote, "And here's my vision, the creation of a deeper, fuller human being, having a full knowledge of self and ultimately connected with all humanity." Unquote. New Age education. Maria Montessori, founder of the world-famous Montessori schools, was a forerunner of New Age education. Rejecting the imposition of wisdom from outside, she wanted to free students to be guided by the inward teacher. She was convinced that this would produce a, quote, new man, able to direct and to mold the future of mankind, unquote. Rudolf Steiner, quote, whose educational philosophy is embodied in the worldwide network of Waldorf schools, defined the Waldorf approach as the art of awakening what is actually there within the human being, unquote. Well-known educator Jack Canfield states the essence of New Age education in similar terms, quote, the next step in the transformation of education will be to nurture and value the emergence of what exists innately within the student, unquote. Jack Canfield's New Age Education Manual, 100 Ways to Enhance Self-Concept in the Classroom, was, quote, recently used in a federally funded teacher education program in Connecticut. Maureen Murdoch's Meditating and Guided Imagery programs, unquote, are another example of New Age religion being promoted in our public schools at taxpayers' expense. The 1982-83, quote, Holistic Education Network LA Conference Series, unquote, held at California State University at Los Angeles, advertised the following speakers and subjects. Beverly Gallion, quote, Holistic Learning, Extrasensory Perception, Mind Synergy, unquote. Barbara Clark, quote, a host of New Age strategies to optimize classroom instruction with students pre-kindergarten to graduate level, unquote. Gay Hendricks, quote, Centering and Transpersonal Education, Learning to Love Yourself, unquote. Joyce Chapman, director of the New Age School in San Diego, quote, Holistic Approach to Remain True to Your Higher Self, unquote. Heavily involved in the planetary initiative for the world we choose, the Association for Humanistic Psychology is an integral part of the New Age movement. Since humanistic psychologists are classical atheists, one would assume that their organization would be very anti-religious. However, New Age Hindu occultism is being introduced into our public schools by humanistic psychologists, all in the name of science, of course. For example, the May-June 1979 Education Network newsletter of the Association for Humanistic Psychology suggested that public school teachers incorporate the following highly religious activities into their daily routine. Quote, the students will do yoga each morning before class, interpret their astrological charts, send messages via ESP, mind project, astral project, heal their own illnesses, speak with their higher selves, and receive information necessary for joyful living, lift energies from the power chakra to the heart chakra, practice skills necessary for color healing, hold an image of themselves as being perfect, receive advice from their personal spirit guides, merge minds with others in the class to experience the collective consciousness of the group, unquote. In The Bridge at Andau, James Michener relates how escapees from Hungary during the 1956 revolution told him they would stay up all night if necessary to deliver their children from the communist lies they had been taught that day at school. Parents in America have failed to do the same, unaware of what is happening to their children. While they have slept, Hinduism has been seductively presented to their children as New Age education. Some parents may be happy to have their children converted to Hinduism in public schools. Many others, however, would be very unhappy if they knew this were happening. The New Age movement has a stranglehold on our entire society. Its most strategic work is in the public schools. It is teaching our children that they are gods, and that the only authority they need follow is the quote-unquote inner light of their higher self. New Age educators are deliberately trying to bring about a transformation of thinking, morals, worldview, and personal identity in public schools across America. It is not honest for them to hide the religious nature of their beliefs behind euphemisms. Jack Canfield speaks in glowing terms of, quote, the essential self that is evoked in New Age education, the high self, unquote. He adds, quote, each person's essential self knows why it's here and what it needs to learn to further its soul purpose. The role of New Age education is to facilitate that inner unfoldment, not to impose values and meanings from the outside, unquote. Truth or lie? Whether they know it or not, what Canfield, Gallion, and others are teaching is basic Hinduism. In Hinduism, the goal of yoga is self-realization, to realize that one is God. This is the quote-unquote truth that is offered to the 1 million pitiful creatures who live today in the streets of Calcutta, where they were born and will die, suffering unspeakable poverty, misery, and disease. What salvation does Hinduism offer them? That by the practice of yoga they can achieve a quote-unquote higher state of consciousness, where they will realize that the physical universe, including their abject misery, is an illusion, Maya, and they are really gods. This is the quote-unquote ancient wisdom we have received with open arms from the gurus and yogis who have brought it to America. Hinduism has turned India, in spite of its vast natural resources and manpower, into one of the poorest and most suffering countries on earth. It could do the same to America if we continue down this path. New Age leader John White, author of more than 200 articles in such prestigious periodicals as Reader's Digest and Science Digest, declares, quote, "Our present world situation is a crisis of consciousness. The solution very simple. Change consciousness." Unquote. The next Whole Earth catalog declares, quote, "We are as gods and might as well get good at it." Unquote. In explaining the basis for her philosophy of New Age education, Beverly Gallion states, quote, "Once we begin to see that we are all God, that we all have the attributes of God, then I think the whole purpose of human life is to re-own the God-likeness within us, the perfect love, the perfect wisdom, the perfect understanding, the perfect intelligence, and when we do that, we create back to that old, that essential oneness which is consciousness." So my whole view is very much based on that idea. The system of confluent education, as I work with it, is totally dependent on that view, because my whole philosophy is that learning is looking within and discovering what information is inside you." Unquote. In his famous poem, The Immortal Friend, world-renowned Hindu philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti sets out on his guided imagery journey to find that same quote-unquote wise person that American students are being conditioned to seek. Krishnamurti eventually finds his friend in the same place that students in America's public schools are finding theirs, within. The closing lines of the poem express the essence of Hinduism and the New Age. Quote, "My search is at an end. In thee I behold all things. I myself am God." Unquote. That is either the most important truth, the greatest discovery one can make, or else it is the most cruel hoax, the most blatant and destructive lie in the universe. The promise of godhood is first found at the very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis chapter 3. It is the offer that Satan, speaking through a serpent, makes to Eve. According to the Bible, this was the lie of lies that destroyed Eve and her descendants. The human race has never escaped its seductive influence in the thousands of years since then, and this lie will be at the heart of the Antichrist religion that he will use to unite the world and bring peace and prosperity for a time before all hell breaks loose on planet Earth. Marilyn Ferguson, Beverly Gallion, and the other New Age leaders mentioned above would vehemently deny that what they teach is a lie, or at all related to Antichrist. We do not question their sincerity or their motives. We must, however, examine the facts. Hinduism teaches that the god Vishnu periodically, at times of great crisis, reincarnates once again upon earth as the avatar or savior for that age. Many New Agers are expecting the age of Aquarius to produce its savior also, a great world leader bringing peace and prosperity to planet Earth. The spirit of the New Age. The Hebrew prophets also spoke of a coming Messiah, and religious Jews still await him today. Christians claim that he has already come. They call him Jesus Christ, and believe that he is personally returning to earth very soon. In spite of the fact that the Bible identifies a denial of Jesus with the spirit of Antichrist, New Age teaching denies that Jesus is the one and only Christ. Instead, it speaks of the quote-unquote Christ spirit, or the quote-unquote Christ consciousness, that temporarily reincarnated into Jesus of Nazareth between his baptism and crucifixion, and is allegedly reincarnated once again in another man, the coming world ruler. Benjamin Krem, who claims to be his John the Baptist, calls him Lord Maitreya. and declares that he is living in a Hindu Pakistani community in southeast London, England. A recent classified ad in a New Age periodical declared, quote, "Ventura County, California welcomes Christ Maitreya. Join us in cultivating the principle of sharing locally and worldwide. New World Central, New Age Networking Headquarters," unquote. Many Christians are convinced that the Antichrist is alive on earth today, waiting in the wings for the curtain to be raised on the next act. Is he Lord Maitreya? What about the coming world ruler who, according to Jean Dixon, was born at 7 a.m. EST on February 5, 1962, and who, she says, will unite the entire world in a new Christianity? The Bible specifically states that the Antichrist will sit in the temple of God and declare himself to be God. There seems little doubt that the declaration of one's own godhood is central to the philosophy underlying the New Age movement. It would therefore not be overstating our case to say that the spirit of the New Age is the spirit of Antichrist, and that it is gathering awesome power and influence in today's world. But what of the Antichrist himself? In order to face that question and further develop our contrary scenario, it will be necessary first of all to examine the Messianic myth.